I'm not going to start with any easy questions.
What would you do if you couldn't fail?
I was vulnerable in the sense of I was just who I was.
The cold exposure conditions the inside of our body to literally adapt.
Whatever happens in the gut happens in the brain, and whatever happens in the brain happens in the gut.
Finding the grace and the humor.
Anti-aging is associated with at least an hour of deep sleep nightly.
Absolutely had mentors, absolutely 100% had coaches.
90+% of the decisions that we make today actually stem from fear.
Allow ourselves to have imperfection.
Nothing starts without a plan, nothing ever goes to plan.
Chaga is actually the most antioxidant-rich food on the planet.
If we can bring a practice into our lives that helps us be more vulnerable, I'm so thrilled that this content is getting out there, that you guys are promoting bold and vulnerable message and aspirations for people, because I hope that we can all really live that every day.
Hey, this is Jessica.
And Svetlana, and you're listening to the Bold and Vulnerable podcast,
where we aim to inspire others to live authentically through sharing the bold and vulnerable stories of peak performers across a variety of industries. Hey guys, it's Jessica here, and you know I love my coffee. We have recently partnered with a company called La Repubblica Coffee. They are completely fair trade, they are non-GMO and all vegan, which you guys know I'm vegan, so I'm totally a fan. But the cool thing is that this is a mushroom coffee company. You know, sometimes people feel stuck in their coffee routine. They feel like they can't live with it, they can't live without it. Maybe coffee makes them feel overwhelmed. This coffee completely makes you feel so zen. It gives you a peace of mind and well-being and a clean energy jolt. You don't have any jitters that you get with coffee because the cordyceps really help to regulate the intake of caffeine from the coffee. It's a rich source of vitamin D, E, and many other things that help your immune function and optimal health. It's a perfect way to incorporate high beneficial superfoods into your morning routine. I love to start my morning with just a smooth cup.
This morning, I was so freaking excited because I ordered my bulk order. I'm telling you, George and I were literally waiting by the door yesterday. I'm not joking. And finally they came at like 7 and we were so excited, and George and I were like, should we drink this now?
Yeah, listeners, you guys are going to be so excited because you get 15% off all of your orders by using the code vulnerable, all caps 15. So vulnerable 15, all caps.
We only partner with companies that we believe in here at Bold and Vulnerable because we really value honesty and just being truthful to our audience. Being a working mom and entrepreneur, you really want to have all the hacks possible at your fingertips. So I'm so freaking excited to be partnering with this company.
Everyone that I've talked to who's tried it has been raving about how delicious it is. And we drink it during our podcast episodes, and just to give us a jolt of energy. It has 7 superfood mushrooms. So not only do you get the benefits and energy of your cordyceps, but you also get the healthy benefits of lion's mane. It gives you so much focus and immunity support. You also get this really nutrient-rich product that elevates your focus and also elevates your gut. So it's almost like using a smart blend of quality chaga, reishi, shiitake, turkey tail, and your immune system just gets this daily boost of energy. And it also helps to alkalize the effects of coffee's natural acidities.
Yeah, definitely. And what I really love about it is that they have a gold standard for their manufacturing, which I think is really important, which tells us that they have high standards, obviously, as do we here at Bold and Vulnerable. The benefits that you're receiving in 1 cup of coffee are just outstanding.
It's kind of like an anti-inflammatory for your body, which is absolutely amazing. And not only that, it has a wonderful taste. So I think that's everything that people are looking for. Even people that don't drink coffee, I think will probably enjoy the taste of La Repubblica coffee.
We have a discount code for you. It is all caps vulnerable 15.
Head over to larepublicasuperfoods.com and type in vulnerable 15. When you check out, you will receive a 15% discount on all of La Repubblica's mushroom coffee.
Get yourself an amazing adaptogenic cup of coffee.
Scott, welcome to the show. And just a quick bio from what I've learned about you so far. You're a senior lecturer and practitioner, and not only fascinated with the brain and neuroscience, but also really a people healer, and you love working with humans to heal via a number of different means, such as, from what I read, triggering innate intelligence of the body, subconscious mind, energetic work, spiritual work. And we're just really excited to have you on the show. So welcome, Scott. And that was just kind of like a quick synopsis, but maybe in your own words, can you tell us what you do and who you are and what you're all about?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, good morning. Thank you very much for having me, and it's really, really nice to be here and get to talk about some of this stuff, and I guess express who I am and what it is that I do, and how I got to this point in my life. So yeah, as you said, I'm an applied movement neurology practitioner, and so that probably needs a little bit of explaining. So what we do in AMN is we calibrate the nervous system. So it's a really, really cool system because it's incredibly laser focused in terms of zooming in and finding trauma or any dysfunction or pain or weakness or anything that's not quite right in the body. You're able to basically navigate the neurophysiology and the anatomy of the person to get to the cause of an issue. So it's not really like any other system that I've seen, and you can really dive into some really, really deep stuff. So when I first started scratching the surface with that one, it was really, really apparent just how effective that system was, and I couldn't have claimed to have understood the full potential of where we might be able to get to in several years. But that very, very quickly just became me. So I think I realised that I found myself in that system very, very quickly because I was really able to connect with people on a deep level and help and start to heal. And then, so yeah, since then, things have sort of progressed on our teaching that system. I still work in movement with people all the time because that's a huge part of our expression. And if we're going to be healthy and functioning, then being able to move well, there are people who believe that we have a brain for no other reason than just to be able to express movement. And yeah, so if I can progress people through to sort of complex and intricate and very well executed, well performed movements, then effectively they're functioning really, really well. So that's a big part of health. And I guess along the way, if you're going to be a healer, if you're going to be someone who can actually help and enhance people's lives and help them to grow into whom the person is that they're on this earth to be, the first person you really need to look after and take care of is yourself. The first person that you need to heal is yourself. And so I guess that was a revelation that came to me, I guess, a little bit later on. But then it's been a really, my healing journey has been, an interesting one, and yeah, something that I'm happy to talk about. And so now where I'm at is I still work with AMN. I still work with people every day, and I get to delve into trauma and into all these other things that have affected their lives, and I get to exist in a space where you can really see the interconnectedness of life, and you can really, really see how clearly we've become disconnected in so many ways in modern society, from nature and I guess from each other at times. And so now one of the things that I'm doing is I'm working with a company called Integrated Vitality Retreats, and we've put together sort of basically a rockstar team of amazing practitioners from different modalities to be able to heal people in the way that they need, and put them in a nourishing environment, in a healthy environment with good energy and good food and all that sort of stuff, and basically just maximise the chances of them leaving that experience expressing themselves at their fullest, and then what unfolds from there in their life is quite amazing. So that's an exciting part of where I'm at, and yeah, getting to see people become their true selves and I guess their best self. So, and yeah, that for me, that feels a very, very satisfying place to be existing at the moment. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
That is beautiful. So there's so much to uncover here and to kind of dissect, but can you first take us through your own healing journey and what got you on this path of just being passionate about mindset and functionality of the human body and how you can heal yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So listen, I'll speak up front about the way that I talk about this because so I think where I am as an AMN practitioner is that we talk a lot about the neurophysiology of the body, and we can describe things in what people, I think the layman's language would describe it as scientific language. And science tends to unite the crowd, and people can agree on that. As soon as you start talking about spiritual healing or mention the word God, you tend to lose kind of half the crowd. And then on the other end of the scale, when you start talking about evidence-based approaches and only following science, you could lose the other half of the crowd. So to me, there's just a whole picture, and I'm just after the truth. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And so pretty much everything that I do is you're just looking for the truth and wherever that lies. And I'm happy to kind of talk about it in any language, but I guess my healing journey, like anybody else's, if you're going to go and uncover the truth, you need to be able to look in all facets of your existence, and you need to really be able to be prepared to sort of overturn or look under every little stone. And so for me, I guess a big part of my healing journey was the first steps was just working with AMN, and then getting to see people's trauma and understand how that sort of impacted on them, seeing how their traumas had changed their life in different events and changed the course of their lives, because then that sparked curiosity in myself, and so I started to just heal wounds more on a physical kind of level, and I could see how that had affected my life and how to change things in my life. And then I guess I became aware that I really wanted to make change for people on the deepest of levels. I was always looking for the best possible result that I could get in terms of healing or enhancing somebody's life. And so things started to change and open up for me. I started to become way more intuitive in the treatment process, and I started experiencing these strange sensations in my body, which would correlate with what the other person was feeling. And I had no explanation for it at the time. And I remember feeling a little bit traumatized myself, because it was really, I would feel pain in my elbow or pain in my stomach, and then, funnily enough, I'd be the other person in front of me would be having a gastrointestinal complaint, and their body was literally talking to me on these subtle levels that we typically just switch off from and ignore. And it's kind of like, as we're born into this physical existence, and the parameters for our world are very much physical and material, and that's the way that the bulk part of society sees the world, as material, physical, and they see this separation between one person and the next. We switch off from that subtle communication, and so that started to turn back on in me. And I remember expressing to many of my clients that I really don't know what's happening to me. I don't understand it, but what I'd learned through AMN was that if you're going to improve or enhance anything in the brain, you just need to place your attention on it. And, more than 95% of our processing is happening in the subconscious mind. So if you place your attention on anything, your brain can start to figure it out. And that's basically what just started to happen to me. I don't understand these sensations. I don't understand this information that I'm getting from the other person. But increasingly, I was able to start navigating my way through a person's pain complaint or a dysfunction via the information that I was receiving in my own body. And so that sense kind of developed, and then I realized I needed to delve further into it. So I started exploring treatment for myself. And the first step for me was I identified that I should probably go and do some Reiki healing and just explore that. And so I went and saw a Reiki healer, and things started to unfold for me from there. And I guess I had some resistance around that. So a funny anecdote around that, which I've shared with a few people. I joked with the Reiki practitioner at the time that it had taken me 25 years to get back to Reiki, because I'd had an experience when I was in my late teens or early 20s. My mother started delving into Reiki healing. And I remember my mum put me on this treatment table, and she started speaking in sensual tones, and it was just not the experience that I was prepared to go with at that point from my mother. So I kind of switched off from Reiki healing and energy work for a long time as a result. But then when I went and saw this Reiki healer, because I had started working, I'd become aware of chakras, and I'd become aware of the energetic anatomy of the body, and I really didn't know that much about it. I just knew that it existed, and I was starting to experience it, and it had come into my kind of physical awareness. When I went and saw this lady, and she started delving into my trauma, she started uncovering past life issues, and I had no belief system set up around past lives at that point. I was open to anything, but I had no rigid belief system set up around past lives. I certainly didn't. I didn't necessarily believe that they existed, but I didn't disbelieve that was a concept. But when she started uncovering these traumas that my soul, as she described it, that my soul had experienced in past lives, it felt incredibly real, and I started getting the sensations in my body that correlated with the traumas that she was kind of describing to me. And what she said to me was that she was getting, or she was understanding that that I was a healer, and that it had basically gone badly in past lives. I'd attempted to be a healer in past lives, and it had gone very, very badly. And she said, when you think of what happened to people who are deemed to be witches or anything like that in centuries gone by, you may have experienced something pretty horrible. And so I think that was certainly, and I started experiencing physical sensations in my body at the time. And then, from there, that I guess it just really resonated. It just, on some deep level, it just felt really right. It felt very true. And basically that really, I guess, consolidated or confirmed for me that was a huge part of the purpose as to why I'm here now, to heal and to get that right, to heal, and that it's okay to be me. And then that kind of later unfolded further, that it was really in this lifetime. We all have a wound, we all have a lifetime wound, and we'll have one trauma in our life that is kind of our greatest trauma. And it's generally something that's happened early in childhood. And even those of us like myself who had a really happy childhood, there'll be a wound there that we recreate in our life, and it's the same pain, So for me, those words of that, it wasn't safe to be me, that I think probably hold true in those past life experiences that the Reiki healer uncovered. For me, in this life, for me, now, I'm the product of a mixed race marriage. So my mother is African American and my father was white Australian, and I grew up on the northern beaches of Sydney, and it's incredibly, certainly in the decades of my childhood, it was incredibly white. My mother was the only black person for 20 miles, basically. So up and down this strip of beaches, she was the only black face, back in the 70s when I was a little kid. And so when I went to primary school, I was the only one of any different colour in my entire school. And then as a result, I was in a fight every second day, sort of defending myself just because you're different. And so that pain, that trauma has reverberated throughout my lifetime. And it was basically the trauma or the pain or the wound of there's no place that it's safe to be me. There's no place that it's safe to be just me, exactly, precisely who I am. And so that kind of played out, in the schoolyard, just, being different. There was no place that it was actually safe to just be, just to be me, because I was clearly different. I was a different colour to everybody else at the school. And so, and I guess that is kind of in a number of different ways. And it's when I look at my life, that same wound, that same pain has reverberated and come back. And all of these different incidents that we look at and think are really separate and completely different, it's the same pain. And so going in and healing that has then, I guess, changed me in terms of who I am, and certainly as a healer, what I'm able to do with people. So once I was able to sort of heal and resolve that trauma, the abilities that I had as a healer certainly increased, and I guess my mind expanded, and the applications that I was able to produce in terms of healing applications within that applied movement neurology modality, that all opened up and expanded. Relationships changed, and you just experience growth. So, and I think now that's kind of why I guess that's why I'm increasingly passionate about what it is that I do, and being able to do that for other people, because I've seen, what's unfolded for me, and then so getting to see, other people's lives unfold in the way that they're supposed to, is incredibly satisfying on the deepest of levels.
I love that you kind of went into many things, but I love that you started with the energy work, the healing, and really kind of exploring. So whatever type of exploring that is for anyone listening, that could be, religious or spiritual exploration, but really diving deep into the healing that feels good for you. And Svetlana and I have really talked about Reiki a lot with each other, but we haven't talked a lot about it on this show. So I'm really glad that you brought that up as something that helped you gain a little bit more clarity with the physical ailments that you were having, because our mind-body connection is so powerful, and, things can come up, whether that's, in your gut where we have so many neurons, or whether that's a different body part that you experience pain, and, Reiki can really bring some of that out for you. So I'm so glad that you dove into that. And Svetlana, I'm sure you have a million questions, because I can just feel your energy through the microphone.
Like my jam right here, and our nervous system, NLP. I'm an NLP practitioner as well, and hypnotherapist, and energy work. Speaking of energy work, I just had energy work done. I went to a healer a couple of days ago, and it was really crazy. I've never experienced somebody that just was really psychic and knew everything, that I could, medical history stuff about my boyfriend that he didn't even write down. There's no way she could have known. She had no idea we were even coming to see her. So it was very bizarre. And it's all stuff that I believe, but of course my logical mind still goes into some skepticism. And
how is that even possible?
Yeah, and I mean, it's because I believe in it all, but I also am a very, because I know there's a lot of people out there that claim to be healers as well, and prey on people too. So I've seen it. So when I know there's a real deal, I know that someone's the real deal, and I can feel it. And she's the real deal, and I have friends that are the real deal, and but I mean, there's so much to unpack here, especially when you talk about the body part. I'm so interested in that aspect, because, I've experienced my own traumas. We all have traumas, where I would be at my chiropractor's office, and, they just touch one part of my body, and I would just have tears stream down my face, because there's obviously something residing in the subtle energy within that area of my body. Even recently, actually, because I just had a baby, and I had a C-section.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. So I had a C-section, and I'm noticing even in myself that I have these spasms in the middle of the night, where I had my C-section, and I'm like, what is going on here? Because my body experienced trauma. So it's all just fascinating. I mean, there's just so much to unpack here. If we were to start just on the topic of the body.
Well, I'd go back to what Jess was just talking about a moment ago as well, which I think ties together everything that you were just starting to mention and talk about. And so when Jess mentioned the mind-body connection, and then you were talking about, you go and see someone and they're the real deal because they just know. And so for me, that really resonates, because I had the same experience. I used to really appreciate. I was kind of an athlete. I call it in a past life, but in my 20s, I was an athlete, and so when I would go to a practitioner, and I'd lie down on their treatment table, and they'd just touch a part of the body, or they just know where something hurt, or they just, they could connect, they could join the dots in your body without you having told them anything about your history, and they could tell where you were sore or where you were injured just by looking at you or touching you, and they just knew. And so it was very clear to me when somebody had an awareness of things about the body that was above mine or greater than what the awareness that I had at that point. So exactly what you described when you went and saw an energy worker, and he was able to see and just know things that within our physical physical separate minds that shouldn't be possible. She shouldn't possibly be able to know that, and so we look at it and we think it's kind of magic or it's woo-woo, or people tend to dismiss it because we don't have a logical explanation for it. But that's the thing. So for me, it's just you're looking for truth, and if there's, science is amazing, science is wonderful, but it's limited. It can't test for everything. So just because we can't test for something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking for it or open to experiencing it. So for me, the mind-body connection is the human energy field, and so we have a dimensionality to our existence. We have multiple dimensions to our existence, and so the physical dimension is just the slowest vibrating and lowest energy dimension, and it's energy which has slowed its vibration down to a level or to a frequency that allows for the physical manifestation of physical matter, and that's the body that we walk around in, and that's how we experience life. That's how we interact and engage with the world and the environment around us, and that feels very real. I can see and touch my hands in front of me, and that feels real to me. The subtle energies that are all around us that we can't see, it's really easy just to dismiss those, and then any strange sensations that we get when someone walks across our path, but we can't see how their energy is affecting our energy, and we just write that off as just one of those funny things. That's actually something. There's actually an interaction that's happening there between two people, and the human energy field. When we talk about health and we talk about disease and we talk about I guess mental health and whatnot, the human energy field is the mind-body connection, because there's a huge amount of energy there. So there's a huge amount of information there. And basically when we kind of break energy right down, if we break it down to kind of its smallest dimensions or its smallest little packets, it's just information. So if we break it right down to Planck's dimensions, it can be just pure information. And so all of the information about our being, about ourself, about those that we've interacted with around us, that's all available in the human energy field. And so that's something for me that is still unfolding. I'm still learning how to work with that, and I'm sure that's going to be a lifelong journey in terms of understanding those subtle levels and those subtle layers. But I got into this healing journey very much from the physical perspective. I got into it from an athlete's perspective and from a sports perspective, and it was all very much just physical body. But I became insatiable about learning, and the more that I learned, and then the more that I experienced with other people, it was impossible to deny these subtle connections that were going on. And so, as I said, I'm open to truth. So I just started looking deeper, and it just turns out there's so much more than what we typically accept or what we typically are prepared to look at. So looking at the human energy field, or the aura, as it's, I guess a lot of people would know about it and describe it. That is I guess it's just energy and it's an energy that allows us to connect to others and allows us to be connected to the environment, and when we're tapped into it and when we're aware of it, then we experience no separation. It's via that energy that we experience no separation between others. And when separation falls away, then it's kind of you don't see race, and you certainly don't see country divides, and you don't see cultural divides, and you don't see separation between ourselves and other sentient beings and whatnot. There is the downside of feeling pain of others, and that's something. So I live in Australia. We've just experienced bushfires, and for me, feeling the pain that was involved in that traumatic event, particularly for the wildlife, I couldn't step outside my door, and it was just without seeing smoke and breathing in the smoke, and I would just experience that as deep empathetic pain for I don't know who, people, animals. I presume it was more animals, but I could definitely feel pain there, and it was that was very real to me. But that's something that I think years ago, before I opened up to all of that energy, I would have been very, very switched off and very, very, very cut off from, and I wouldn't have experienced it. I certainly always described myself as somebody who didn't feel things, and it's only via this process of working with other people's bodies and other people's energy systems that all that has opened up for me. And as I said, it's purely motivated by just trying to get to the bottom of things and get to the truth of the matter. Because if we're talking about healing and we're talking about eventually going to be our best selves, we need to uncover whatever's hidden there, and that basically means we just need to search for the truth and be open to whatever we find. So I think, so for me, if that answers the question, the mind-body connection, energy, human energy field, and the other dimensions that we that make up our being, I think for me that's kind of the truth that we kind of all need to be just open to exploring and open to looking at.
Yeah, you mentioned, in the beginning of our chat and just now, just that people reconnecting with nature or connecting with nature in general, and how that energy of animals and plants and other things in your environment can truly, really affect everything that you're going through if you tap into it. And I think that, I kind of want to go down a path of maybe how we can give the listeners maybe I know there's no quick way to heal, right? I certainly know that in my own journey. I'm on my path of healing, and it's never ending. But maybe for the listeners, something that a biohack of really trying to reconnect back with nature, especially in a society where we are plugged into our phones, we're plugged into our computers, we're constantly consuming information. How can people maybe reconnect with nature? And is that as simple as walking outside and looking up to the sky and feeling the wind on your face? Or is there something else that you would recommend maybe in your retreat practices or anything that you've worked on?
Yeah, there's lots of things. We could talk for hours about reconnecting to nature and experiencing the connection between that we have between all of us. But some simple things that you can do. Forest bathing, get out. Get out into nature, and if you have bushland near you, if you have a beach that is uncrowded, not full of people, actually contact nature. I mean, that's the environment that we evolved in. That's actually where we're designed to be. And so when we actually put ourselves in that environment that we've evolved in, funnily enough, our physiology responds in really positive ways. So there's been plenty of studies done on forest bathing, which basically just means going out into the bush or into the forest and just spending time there. We have a really, really positive immune response. So there was a study done a few years ago where there was groups of people put out into a forest, bathed in the forest for 3 hours, 3 hours on a Saturday, 3 hours on a Sunday, so 6 hours total over 2 days. And that group across the board experienced a 56% boost in their immune function. And then that same group was measured a month later, and on average, I think the figure was 21 to 23%. That their immune function was still elevated above where it was prior to the commencement of the study. So literally just going out and going for a walk in the woods is incredibly helpful for your health, incredibly beneficial for your health. So you can boost your immune system function literally by just going out into the forest and just experiencing being there. So that is something that I recommend. That is something that I do. Being connected to the earth directly, so just via skin contact, so walking around in bare feet. Again, I'm pretty fortunate. I live in Australia. We're generally reasonably casual here, and walking around with bare feet is not all that frowned upon. It's not necessarily well accepted to walk into a business meeting with bare feet, but you can walk around the streets. It's particularly where I live, where it's not too far away from the beach. There's a lot of people that walk around in bare feet all the time. So being connected to the earth is incredibly rich in electrons. So, and that comes to the earth from the sun via lightning strikes. And so the earth is negatively charged. And if we're going to be healthy in our physical body, the physical body needs to maintain, all the tissues in the physical body need to maintain and hold a net negative charge, which basically just means we need to have more electrons than protons. So when we get injured, when we get sick, when we experience dysfunction, we literally lose, it's like we leak or we lose electrons. So you can basically charge that back up. It's like charging the battery. So just being contacted to the earth, that's what grounding does. Grounding will charge the body up with electrons, and it'll also equilibrate the autonomic nervous system tone of the body to that of the earth. So it'll equilibrate with the earth, and the earth resonates at around about 12.5 hertz. So Schumann's resonance, I think it's 12.83 if we're going to be precise, but that correlates with alpha brainwaves. And so alpha brainwaves is kind of where we kind of get to in the early stages of meditation, when you're relaxed and you're calm, but you can still think clearly. And that brings me to my next little hack that I would add to this. So if you're going to sort of stack a few of these things together, because that's something that we do in neurology, and that is incredibly impactful when you just stack stimuli one on top of the other, that will amplify the benefit for the organism or for the body that you're working with. So if you can stack being in a forest, if you can stack just actually being connected physically to the ground, and that might be just having bare feet, or if you don't want to have bare feet, you can literally just go and hug a tree. Then you are then connected to the earth, and you can also try and get yourself into what we call a whole brain state. So a lot of people are aware of the concept, and this concept is kind of disputed. So it's by no means a 100% thing, but I think for a long time we've accepted that there's a hemisphericity that we have about the brain, and so we have a left side and a right side. The left side being identifying with critical analytical thinking, and the right side being the right side being the emotional creative side, and the left side being critical analytical thinking. Whether or not that is true, the hemisphericity that we experience relates. There is a difference in the way the brain processes information, and it definitely processes information. Novel experiences on one side of the brain and habituated experiences on the other side of the brain. So the brain definitely, although we have these two hemispheres, we have two hemispheres for a reason, and they both process information. But the body in between those two hemispheres is called the corpus callosum, and that's about 200 million axons and dendrites. So these little connective wires that connect up the two hemispheres, and so that's all the communication between those two hemispheres of the brain, and so and they are meant to be able to communicate. When the corpus callosum, kind of, for want of a better expression, experiences tension, and signals are not able to go to transmit freely across the brain from one side to the other, then we experience a one-sidedness or an increased one-sidedness about the brain. And whether that correlates with critical analytical thinking, or whether that correlates with just being overly emotional, certainly things change for us and we don't function as well as we could do. So getting yourself into a whole brain state basically just means that you can be at your best in a crisis. And so the example that I give to clients all the time is, if you were to imagine that you were at the airport and you missed a flight, you were rushing to make a flight, and you had 3 other connecting flights to get yourself to your eventual destination, where you had a speaking engagement in front of a lot of people. There are going to be a lot of people waiting for you. If you missed that first flight, there's going to be a degree of panic, because everything kind of falls apart at that point. And so I think everybody's been in the situation where they've missed either a plane or a bus or a car ride, and there's going to be consequences to it, and then we experience a degree of panic. And in that moment of panic, it's difficult to think, because we get really emotional. We get really, really emotional. We experience the panic, and our body sends us these physical, these visceral sensations that we feel, butterflies in our stomach, or we experience sweating or an increase in body temperature, and that just reinforces for us that yes, I am feeling really emotional about this. This is obviously a really this is a critical situation, and the brain is an incredible virtual reality machine. It can make any scenario really real for you if it chooses to. So it will send you those sensations and reinforce that emotional experience for you, and it becomes very difficult to think. It becomes difficult to then to work out the solutions that you need to. So, and that's something that I guess on a chronic level, we experience every day just through stress. So people living with stress, just living in modern society, and as a result, we become over-analytical or we become over-emotional, but we just don't function at our best. So something really simple that you can do is literally just cross one wrist over the other, cross one ankle over the other, and just sit in that posture for a couple of minutes. And what you're doing is when you take, so if we talk about neurology, we explain what's actually happening when you do that. If you take your right hand, the motor function of that right hand is governed and is initiated from the left cortex. And when you cross that hand over the midline and you take your right hand and cross it over to the left side of your body and you touch your left thigh or your left knee, what you're doing is you're then initiating, you're sending a sensory signal from the left side of your body to the right side of your brain. And so then that forces the sensory cortex on the right side to communicate with the motor cortex on the left side and vice versa. And so when you just sit there and then give the body the cue that the left side of your brain just needs to be talking and communicating with the right side of the body, within a couple of minutes, you'll experience your autonomic nervous system, just the level of the sympathetic response in your autonomic nervous system will drop and relax. And it doesn't change the situation. If you were that person who was racing to make that flight, it's not going to magically make you catch the flight, but it will allow you to start thinking and making decisions, and you can start looking at other flights, and you can start working out if you need to rent a car and potentially, drive yourself from one airport to another, and you'll be able to make decisions and function at a high level in that stressful situation. So they're three really cool, simple little tips. You can get out into the forest, you can connect yourself directly with the earth, and you can connect the hemispheres of your brain. And if you do those three things, that's really simple. You'll experience a change in your physiology, and you'll experience a change in the way that you interact with other people, and certainly with the environment around you.
Thank you for sharing those tips. And I think those are really great for people who maybe haven't tried meditation. And I know meditation is kind of like this scary word to some people, but I think that is such a simple way, just placing your hands on the opposite knees and just sitting in a position and not even trying anything but that. I think that that's a really cool thing for people that might be scared of the word meditation and what that might mean, and if they're good at it or if they're not good at it. It's funny, as you were talking, I was sitting here and I was like, he's explaining the science behind this, which I love because I like marrying the science with the spiritual side of things. But I sat there and I was doing what you told everyone to do, and I put my right hand to my left knee, left hand to right knee. It was so weird because I had this weird flashback to being in San Francisco in a time when I was outside in nature, because I'm obviously not right now. I'm in front of my computer. I'm in my office. But I flashed back to this time when I was in Muir Woods in San Francisco, or northern San Francisco. And I just saw redwoods in my brain. And so I must have sat that same way or done that same thing at some point when I was there last. But that just goes to show you how powerful it is. You don't need to try to meditate. You don't need to try anything, really. Just trying to sit there and connect back with your body is so important.
Start with wherever you're at. And I couldn't tell you the number of times I've heard that from people that I can't meditate. It's not I just can't do that. Well, look, if your whole entire life experience has been in beta brainwaves, which we call the monkey mind, where your mind is racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, to try and slow that down is really challenging. And for a lot of people who live with that hemisphericity, who just live on one side of the brain predominantly, it's going to feel really challenging when you sit down and somebody says you need to meditate and just sit here and just quiet the mind. your last 3 seconds before you start thinking about what it is you'd like to eat, you start to realize that you're kind of hungry. What have I got coming up? And who am I seeing? I need to call someone. And before you know it, your mind is racing again, and it feels really difficult to. It does. It feels almost impossible to try and quiet that down. That's a really simple way to do it. And the whole brain posture, just sitting with your wrists crossed and your ankles crossed, you can do that in a business meeting. And nobody needs to know. You can sit there if you're feeling stressed at work, and you can just cross your ankles, cross your wrists, and you can slow things down, and nobody needs to know that you're doing something that might be deemed as weird or strange. So you can literally just calm yourself down and slow the world down with just this simple little posture. And if we had more of that, the world would be a calmer, more rational thinking place. And exactly what you said. Like, meditation is a wonderful thing, and I was certainly someone who like anybody who starts out on a meditation journey. I was terrible at it. I couldn't, I couldn't sit still. I couldn't clear my mind. I just couldn't do any of that stuff. So I started with guided meditations. I found that much easier to do. And then I guess it was more once I started attempting to do some just solo meditations on my own. I just started experiencing more energy, and I could feel energy moving, and that was incredibly motivating for me, because that was everything that I wanted in healing practice, because I could see that my capabilities and my abilities as a healer would improve if I could feel energy and I guess manipulate it or work with it more. So then I found, for me, there was a motivation there. There was a motivation to sort of sit down and meditate. And I think for anybody who starts on a meditation journey, it's just finding that moment where you perceive the benefit in it. Where if you just walk away, get up from your 5-minute meditation and experience a calm mind, and you then encounter a stressful situation and your emotional reactivity is way less than what it was previously, that it's then very easy to link the benefit with that time investment, and then you'll start to make time to do it. So I would suggest to anybody who's thinking about meditation and who's felt exactly the same way we were just describing, that it was too difficult, I can't quiet the mind, it's not me, it's not for me, it's not, it doesn't feel right. I would suggest just starting with heart rate coherence. So the Heart Math Institute, if you have heard of it, you can go to their website and you can download little guided meditations that are like 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, and you can literally you can cohere the brain and the heart together, and the heart sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart, which, when you stop and think about that, is an amazing thing, because we think about the brain governing the entire body, but the heart is actually sending far more signals to the brain and telling it what to do and how to react than the other way around. So when we actually sit quietly for a few minutes and cohere those two organs together, what we experience is coherence in the entire system. So the entire nervous system then begins to communicate on a far more coherent level, and we're able to be more in touch with our feelings and our emotions. We're able to make more rational, more sensible decisions. We're not getting stressed anywhere near as much, and we're literally improving our health in doing it. And it's really, really simple, and it's really, really quick to do. So that's another really simple little tip, and that's something, if you've thought about exploring meditation, I think that's a really, really fantastic place to start.
Hey listeners, quick interruption to your podcast. For those of you that can't see Svetlana and I right now, we both have coffee mugs in our hand, and we are always sipping on our La Repubblica coffee. And you guys can actually enjoy the benefits and the adaptogens and all the beautiful qualities of this coffee as well, because they are actually our partners and our sponsors.
Well, I'm obviously sipping on my La Repubblica coffee right now. I can't do a podcast interview without it. Nothing really works the way that this stuff works. There really is something in this coffee, and I mean it's the mushrooms, it's the reishi that gives you sort of like that zen feel.
I know it's wintertime right now, and if you guys maybe are feeling a little stuffy or feel a little tingle in your throat, this is the perfect elixir that can not only fight a common cold, but it helps your skin glow, your hair grow thicker, and reduces inflammation in your body. Chaga is amazing. It also contains cordyceps for better performance and increased energy, but not the crash that coffee might give you from a caffeine standpoint.
Combating mom brain and fatigue right now, it's really helping me maintain focus and maintain that sustainability that I need to get on throughout my day, especially with a newborn and running multiple businesses.
You guys are going to love this coffee. Not only does it have the 7 adaptogenic mushroom extracts, but it will certainly transform your morning coffee ritual. And it's really something that you can integrate really easily into your peak performance habits.
I can attest to La Republica's coffee being one of the best elixirs that I've tried thus far, and I have tried several. I never, ever, ever talk about products unless I love them. If you guys are interested, we do have a discount code. It is
vulnerable, all caps 15. So vulnerable 15. Head over to larepublicasuperfoods.com and type in vulnerable 15. When you check out, you will receive a 15% discount on all of La Republica's mushroom coffee. Thanks for listening. Go grab your 15% discount. And now back to our episode.
Just when you said that you envisioned Muir Woods, I was literally thinking the same thing because of Sausalito. We're literally an exit away where we're moving, and I was like, I can't wait to go to Muir Woods because I love going into what you talked about, forest bathing. I love doing that when I feel like I need to just reconnect and settle my mind. It's just amazing. Like yesterday we went to the beach, and I instantly feel this sense of calmness of like just everything. When the monkey mind is on, I'm like, all right, it's time to chill you out a little bit. You're gonna take a little vacation, and we're gonna take a little break. And it's once you get into meditation, because I used to be the exact same way. I'm like, I can't sit for 2 minutes. This is insane. Are you crazy? My boyfriend used to be like, come on, we're going to sit for 5 minutes. I'm like, I can't do this. I can't right now. There's too much. I'm like, finally. And now when I do it, it's like when my monkey brain is on, and as soon as I sit down, the second I sit down, because I've trained myself, it's like I just melt. Like I'm almost just ready to just fall asleep. I'm like, this feels so much better.
The other thing for me, I think, so what you described going to the beach is perfect, and exactly what we said, where the effect of grounding is basically going to be strongest at the beach. That's where you're going to get the greatest amount of electrons. You've got moving water, so you will gain electrons from moving water, and you'll lose electrons in still water. So, if you're an athlete and you're looking to recover from a sporting game, I see a lot of athletes who they're going to do a pool session afterwards. If you go and have a swim in the ocean, that is healthy and it's healing and it's recharging. If you go and jump into a chlorinated pool, yes, it feels good and you're moving your muscles in water and you're experiencing less gravity, but it's not as healing and it's not as restorative, or it doesn't repair the body anywhere near as well as what jumping into the ocean or going to the beach will actually do. So
everything. It's like as soon as I go in, and I will literally take off my shoes and go into the sand and just stand there or just sit down. I've always had a greater connection with the beach than with, say, the forest, but I love both just as much. But the beach, for whatever reason, energetically, I just feel way more connected with the beach.
Also, talking about the words that you just said about meditation and why you couldn't sit still for 2 minutes. Again, like we said, that's something that a lot of people experience, that just feel restless and just can't stay there. The other thing for me, when we talk about you need to be able to link a benefit, and you need to link a benefit to that action so that you're then motivated to then go and do it again and again and get better at it, is for me a huge thing. And this is something I'm saying to clients all the time, is who do you want to be in charge? Who do you want to be running the show? Do you want your body to be running the show? Do you want the body to be the mind, or do you want to be the mind? Does the body, does the brain and the mind want to actually be the mind that is governing you and taking you towards whatever future you're headed towards? Because the body runs on automatic programs, and so those sensations when you sit down and you're there for 2 minutes and all of a sudden you start to feel restless, that is exactly the subconscious programs of the body. Because the body's if it decides that it gets a chemical hit from if it gets a chemical neurotransmitter or neurosubstrate hit of a particular mixture by running and by moving, by increasing its stress levels, that's kind of what it gets used to. So it habituates itself to these cocktails of chemicals that the pituitary gland releases, and it kind of gets hooked on that. It's almost like it's almost like addictive behavior is what goes on in our subconscious. And so when you try and do something different, like sit still and just calm the mind down, then the body says, hang on, I'm not on board with that. That's not, that's not how I operate. I'm going to send you some signals and get you moving the way and doing the things that I want you to do. And this is something that kind of Joe Dispenza is really big on. So he talks about this kind of stuff all the time. And basically that means that's when you're experiencing these subconscious programs. And so for me, what was really motivating was, do I want to be in charge of the show here, or do I want to just sit back and let the body take me to wherever I want to go? Because I've got some goals and got some dreams and got some things, got some ideas about how I would like my life to unfold. And when I sit down to meditate, then when I first started, it became really clear and apparent to me, like I'm not completely in charge here. My body's sending me signals and cueing me to go and do something that it wants to do. So that was really motivating to sit down and sort of kind of take control back, take charge of your own body, and then as such, you're starting to take charge of your own future, because you're starting to reorganize the subconscious mind towards the future and towards the end that you're looking for. And so that's now become a huge part of what I do. I guess in healing work is, I guess, with the AMN work that I'm doing, I work with charges and with dysfunction, and I can clear pain, and I can navigate the neurophysiology of the body via bioelectricity and normalize things and kind of restore health. We can restore health. But I also work now with the subconscious mind, and we can input the programs into the body. We can input those the deepest thoughts into the subconscious mind, and so they're not my thoughts. They would be, if it's the thoughts of the person that I'm working with, it's the thoughts that they would like to have in their subconscious, rather than the thoughts that are just running at 1 million miles an hour deep in their subconscious and kind of guiding them, towards certain behaviors and eventually towards, certain ends, certain ends that are not necessarily their conscious goals. And so for me, that first little step in meditation is probably where you experience it. So, and I think that's a really, really cool point to have that realization. I think, who do we want to be in charge? Who's running the show? And it's for me, that was a line in the sand moment. And, I'm exceptionally grateful that I had that moment and that I was able to make the decision that I made. And I feel far more in control of my own sort of life and destiny now as a result.
Yeah. You mentioned the word control there, and I wanted to kind of get into that power that we don't even know that we have sometimes. And, I'm a yoga teacher, so a lot of times I will see that students are trying to hold back from releasing something. And so really, my goal in almost every class is to get the students to release those vagus nerves through or through just releasing noise to activate that part of their neurons, essentially, because that can correlate to minimizing inflammation. And so I really see a physical change whenever there's somebody that's really holding back, and I'm saying inhale, okay, exhale, but make noise when you exhale, stimulate that vagus nerve, and then I literally see people's shoulders dropping 2 inches. And so sometimes we almost think that we're in control. We're almost like holding too tight. Like, no, I'm in control. I have the power. I'm not going to do this. Like, this is too much. But then when you let go, you almost have even more power over what you're doing neurologically and how you're sending those waves, energetic waves through your body to then back up to change your mind and to change your brain subconsciously. So that's really something that came to mind when you were talking about taking back that power. And another thing that came to mind that I want to mention, Svetlana and I've had 2 people on the show that have talked about the Wim Hof method and really kind of going into controlling your breath, controlling your mind, controlling the temperature of your body to be able to overcome what you're going through. And even just talking about going out in nature and bathing and jumping in water, and it might even be ice cold water, but being able to take control of your mind body connection there to say, this is what I'm made for. I'm from the earth. We're designed for this. So really just wanted to mention those as just two little biohacks to kind of really get into more anti-inflammation work from a neurological standpoint. But not sure if you know anything about like neuroinflammation or how that might affect your life, or if you've kind of gotten into that within your healing journey or your studies, or if you want to touch on it.
That's a huge part of what I do. Yeah, absolutely. And let me come back to it, because I was just going to say very quickly about, like, it's very cool what you're saying about the Wim Hof method and getting out and literally exposing your body to these extreme temperatures and these extreme environments, and then just you taking control, calming it down, and you just overriding the stress response and overriding those reflexive responses of the body. That's kind of what makes us human, or that is what sort of sets the human brain apart from others. So the neocortex, that's the picture of the brain that everybody sees on anatomy diagrams. The prefrontal cortex, so the basically the front of the brain, that is what is so overly developed and so much larger in the human brain than in other species. And so the subconscious mind and all these reflexive responses of the body, that's 95+% of what is going on in the body, and those reflexive responses are really, really hardwired. But what we have as a direct function of having a prefrontal cortex that is so well developed and is so large, is that we have the ability, just through our willpower, to be able to override those sensations and to be able to override those reflexes. So if you want to talk about taking power back and taking control back, that's the part of the brain that's doing it, and that's what sets us apart from other species, and that's what kind of makes the human brain so special. So activities like that and exercises and practices like that, I think really they're a really, really important part, or a really important or impactful way to be able to engage with, I guess, your own personal magnificence of being human, like of human expression. So I'm 100% on board with that, because I think it really kind of, in one way or other, it kind of brings you back to your truth, because it kind of brings you back to the truth of who you are, and you get to express, the magnificence of your own brain, this incredible organ that you've been gifted. And I guess for most of us, we're not taking it out and exercising it or pushing it anywhere near as hard as we possibly could, or as it's designed to be able to do. So practices like that, and it doesn't have to be, freezing yourself on a mountaintop, but that's an incredibly impactful way to go and do it. Getting onto neuroinflammation, yes, absolutely. That is something that I work with all the time, and that is something that is kind of all pervasive in society. So when people talk about neuroinflammation, what they're generally, I think what most people picture is a traumatic brain injury, so a concussion or a serious head trauma, and it doesn't have to be that way. So an emotional trauma, and we've all experienced emotional traumas, an emotional trauma can have a neuroinflammatory response and an effect on the brain that is comparable to a traumatic brain injury. And I find that fascinating, because that is something that we've all experienced, and literally we could all potentially be walking around with sort of traumatic brain injuries if we've experienced significant trauma. Now, the way that it works is, in a normal brain, in a normal healthy brain, if you experience a physical trauma, within 3 to 5 minutes of experiencing that trauma, the blood-brain barrier will open, and then basically certain macrophages from the body can cross the blood-brain barrier. They can come in. They can initiate a healing response, so an inflammatory response, which is healing in the brain. And that inflammatory response is normal, is natural, and is supposed to happen. And basically, what that inflammation is doing is these glial cells essentially surround and engulf all of the damaged tissues, so all of the damaged neurons or damaged dendrites, axons, and they engulf that tissue, and they kind of just burn it up, eat it up, and then pass it out as waste, and it gets passed out through the glymphatic clearance pathway. Now, and then the brain initiates an anti-inflammatory response, and the brain can return to homeostasis, it can return to normal. So that's a normal response, and that's what is supposed to happen in all of us. when you have repeated trauma, so the first trauma, the first emotional trauma or the first physical trauma often doesn't do too much damage to us unless it's a significant impact or a huge traumatic experience. It's repeated trauma. It's the second brain insult, and it's the repeated insults that kind of damage that anti-inflammatory mechanism. And what happens is the glial cells can become primed, and they just continue to inflame. And so that's what people experience when we talk about neuroinflammation and chronic neuroinflammation and the symptoms that go with that, because the symptoms of neuroinflammation are kind of varied and all pervasive. So they could be headaches, they could be intolerance to sensory stimuli, to chemical stimuli, so like smells or sensory stimuli like lights and sound. It could be just literally like having an intolerance to physical exercise or physical exertion, and that's something that a lot of people experience when they're dealing with neuroinflammation, is that they just go out for a normal day and they're on their feet for a bit longer than they normally are, and they just absolutely shatter. Their whole system just crashes down because they can't tolerate the increased level of physical exertion. And so it's those repeated insults that prime the glial cells, and then basically the glial cells can turn on other glial cells, and then those cells can turn on other glial cells. And so it's a cascade of neuroinflammatory responses in the brain. And basically when those inflammatory processes are kind of left unchecked, then what they're doing is they're just burning up neuronal connections. And so we're kind of losing connectivity, and then what we experience is a lack of function, because all of those connections relate to some function or other in the body. And so we experience a loss of function. And those same cells, when the anti-inflammatory response is initiated, those same glial cells, they do have this incredible function where they can literally guide stem cells into making these connections, which can be on a relative scale, kind of the same kind of distance that an albatross flies. An albatross is sort of, flies thousands and thousands of kilometers across the oceans. On a relative scale within the brain, some of these neuronal connections are kind of on that same scale. And so these glial cells guide those connections so that these little dendrites can connect with other neurons a long distance away. And so when those connections are not being formed, you just kind of have more random connections being formed, or less targeted, less intelligent connections being formed. And so the function that we recover is greatly reduced. So that's neuroinflammation. So as an AMN practitioner, that is something that I work with all the time, because I can change that response. We can stop the inflammatory response and initiate the anti-inflammatory response, and then the body can begin to return itself back to health again. And limbic traumas, limbic conflicts are often correlated, very, very, very often correlated. So these emotional traumas will be linked to a lot of these inflammatory responses. And so that's something that I see a lot. I will scan the body and find neuroinflammation, and then very often there'll be an emotional trauma. That may have been something from childhood. We can actually go into the trauma and find out what it was, and we can then normalize it and clear it, and the individual can begin to return to health. But neuroinflammation it's a huge topic. It's not something that is all that well understood. I think we're starting to understand a little bit better through sports like American football, and in my country, rugby and rugby union, rugby league, because we're now seeing a lot of players who are dying early, or we start to understand PTSD, and that people experience trauma after having experienced seen something traumatic years before. So a lot of returned servicemen are taking their own lives, and that's largely due to these neuroinflammatory processes. The guy who set up AMN, who created applied movement neurology, is an amazing, beautiful mind by the name of David Fleming. And that all came about because he witnessed his best friend murdered in front of him when he was 17 years old. And after that, he experienced a cascade of symptoms. So it was some time after that, I think he experienced symptoms of being irritable and getting and rage and getting angry and whatnot, which a lot of young men do. But then his lungs started collapsing, and he started having all these incredible physical symptoms, and he nearly died several times because his lungs were collapsing. And that was all just from having seen a traumatic event. Like nothing physical actually happened to him. He literally just saw his best friend murdered. He literally saw his best friend murdered right in front of him, and then his body over time just slowly began to sort of pack it in. And so that then became, I guess, through that experience, it was it became, I guess, a quest for knowledge for him, and that's kind of led him down the pathway of creating this incredible system that I kind of work in today. But yeah, so neuroinflammation and what it correlates to, PTSD, all of these anxiety disorders, depression and whatnot, they all correlate with neuroinflammation. It's a huge topic.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Is there kind of a vulnerable moment in your life? This is the Bold and Vulnerable podcast, so I have to ask, is there a vulnerable moment in your life that you can share where maybe you were impacted by anything that we've been talking about so far, whether that's your own healing journey or your own neuroinflammation affecting your life in some traumatic way, or anything that you would want to share that might help somebody out there who is going through something?
Yeah, absolutely. What I mentioned earlier about that we have a life wound, and then we have that one life wound that we generally experience in childhood sometime early on, and then it's that same pain that we feel throughout a number of different events. So as I said, for me, the initial one for me was going to school and finding out that I was different, and then literally just being in a fight and being kind of punished for that every other day. And then what I felt at different times through my life was really similar. So I have a couple of moments that I think for me, probably the two biggest ones that were exactly the same pain. And that pain was that there's no place that it's safe to be me. There's no place that it's safe to just be me, be myself. And then as such, be vulnerable. I guess when I was in 4th grade at school, so I would have been 9 years old, and it was just another fight on another day. One kid, called me a couple of names, racial slurs, and then, wanted to fight. So I found myself fighting this kid in the playground, and then, as happens, a big crowd gathered around, and look, I was doing okay, and then another kid jumped in and started, jumped in and called me those same names, and then and jumped into the fight. So I was against 2. And again, I was doing okay. And then I remember just this moment, and that really wasn't all that far out of the ordinary. Like, I kind of experienced that lots of times before. So I didn't find that traumatic, and I felt, I knew what I was doing. But I remember I just got a sense that something wasn't in that moment. I got a sense that something wasn't right behind me. I experienced fear behind me. And I turned around and I saw a friend of mine in the circle. He was in the crowd of people watching the fight. And then out of nowhere, he jumped in and took a swing at me and tried to hit me. And I can feel myself sort of get emotional thinking about it now, but it was like, it was this real realization, like, there's nowhere that it's safe to be me. There's nowhere that, this is a friend of mine and he's jumping in trying to hit me just because I'm a different color. And it was like, where can I actually be myself? Who can I share that with? Like, there was nowhere that I felt that I could do that. And I didn't feel that I could go home. And I was very clear that I couldn't go home and tell my mother about any of this stuff because, my mother was from South Central LA. Like, she would have, she would have come out and, unleashed the ghetto on the people at school. And that would not have been helpful for me. So I didn't tell my mum about any of this sort of stuff till I was in my mid-20s. She was horrified that I went through all that. She thought everything was fine. But, that was something I was very clear that I needed to face on my own. And I guess for me, the other moment that really, really just drove it home to me that I was different and that there was no place that was really safe was when we went home to, as my mum always just called it, going home. We went home to LA and we stayed with my auntie. So my mother's sister and her kids, and it was South Central LA. It was at the height of, gang violence, and we were in, it was in the 80s, and we were in a really, really rough neighborhood. And it was the happiest time of my life. I was just surrounded by all these other little black kids, and I just felt like I fit in. And I was just so incredibly happy. It just felt right. It was really, really surreal. It was an amazing time. And then on one day we went to the Jesse Owens Memorial Swimming Pool, and for some reason, I don't know why, but my mother and my auntie and all the other kids went inside, and I sat outside on the play equipment. I can't think for the life of me why my mother would have allowed her son to sort of be left unattended, in that area. But it was a significant moment that I think was supposed to happen, and for whatever reason, she let me be there. And I was just sitting on the play equipment, just minding my own business, and these two other little black kids came up, and out of nowhere, one of them pulled a knife on me and started waving this knife on my face. And I can never forget the words, because this knife was waving around in my face, and he said, "Get your white ass out of here." And it was the first time that I'd ever been called white, because I was, I'm brown, and when you grow up in an all white environment, you're not white, so you must be black. And then I went over there, and I was living in an environment where everybody was black, and I just felt so comfortable. I felt like I was finally me, and I felt whole. I didn't have those words to describe it then, but I felt whole, and that was shattered. It was that whole moment was just completely shattered by those words, and it wasn't the knife. It was those words, and I kind of went off into a daze. I was in a trance, just lost thinking about it while this knife was kind of waving around in front of me, and I kind of snapped out of it after a little while and realised I need to deal with this knife first. And then so I stood up to the kid, and I got him to back off, and someone else recognised me because they knew my cousin, and they knew that I could beat up my cousin, and my cousin could beat them up, so they left me alone. But I was still left with that shattering moment. And I ended up winning speech contests. I ended up writing speeches about shades of grey, and being, realising that, I wasn't white, I wasn't black, I was somewhere in between. I was a shade of grey. And I guess from that moment, what I did was and this started from when I was 4 years old in kindergarten, and the very first fight that I got into, I lost. I got punched in the nose, and my automatic response was, I cried. And, other kids saw weakness. Other kids saw tears, and that was perceived as weakness. And so then you're a target. And so then I kind of had to learn how to fight by trial and error. And I worked out very quickly that it was a lot better if you just didn't show weakness, don't show vulnerability. So that was something that in my healing journey that I really had to work to overcome. And even in my adult life, I can remember when I lived in Spain, I had a Spanish girlfriend, and we had this cultural moment where she was really upset at me and she felt that she didn't feel loved. She didn't feel that I loved her because I didn't get emotional, I didn't cry. And I remember saying, "Well, I don't cry." And she's like, "Well, yes, you do. You have to cry." And I said, "Well, I don't. Like, I literally couldn't cry. Like, I cried when my father passed away, and I cried when there was something incredibly emotional, incredibly impactful in my life. But short of that, I just didn't see tears, because that was something that I'd shut out from about age 4. And I remember her saying to me, "It's like when you see your father cry. I know that he loves me, and he loves my mother, and he loves my family because he cries and he shows it." And she said, "It's like that." And I remember saying, "Well, I've never seen my father cry. What are you talking about? This is really strange. And I certainly don't cry, because men don't cry." Overcoming that and beginning to see and understand that vulnerability is actually strength. You actually need to be incredibly strong to be vulnerable. And then, being vulnerable allows you to express your strength. And that was really challenging for my conscious mind to overcome. And I think for my subconscious as well. But that was a huge part of my healing journey, sort of going into those moments and unpacking them, and then understanding what they actually meant in the context of my life, and then understanding how they actually all linked together, and that it was actually the same pain, and then understanding how that had then, and how it had made me shut down and shut off from that vulnerability, and then just basically just refused to express it. And so once I began to learn to express my vulnerability, well, then again, energy changes, and that was incredibly healing, and it changes who you are as a person. You become more whole as a person. So yeah, for me, I would encourage that to anyone, certainly any man, any guy who's listening, because it's something as guys that we do. We shut off from that. We don't show our emotions. We're kind of taught from a young age that's not something that we're supposed to do. It's actually okay. It's actually, and on the other side of it, once you learn how to do it, it's actually a good thing. I'm not running around crying all day every day, but I can express tears now, and I can let those emotions out, and that's something that I say to people in healing all the time. Good energy or bad energy, it just needs to move. Energy needs to flow, and stuck energy is literally what brings about disease, and that's what brings about ill health. And so when we don't express our vulnerability, then we're literally blocking energy. And when we block that flow, then we're advancing ill health, and we're advancing disease and things that we really want to avoid. So vulnerability is strength, and if it's something that you're looking into, I would 100% encourage that you find the strength and the courage to explore it as far as you possibly can.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that and going deep with us. I appreciate it. And I know our listeners are waiting to hear these vulnerable moments from our guests who can have all the knowledge in the world and be tip-top peak performance in their own life. But then everyone, like you said, has a traumatic thing that may have happened. Everyone has it. And you're right, vulnerability is strength. And so thank you for being so strong and sharing that, and providing some guidance and some help for even some of the male listeners out there, because it's so important. And I know we talked about this a little bit off air before we jumped on, but I couldn't help but think when you were talking about getting in fights when you were younger, to our quick chat of how you got into Taekwondo, and just thinking subconsciously like, okay, he needed to know how to fight. He wanted to know how to fight for himself. And Taekwondo is meditative, and I had my own Tang Soo Do experience, which is meditative, and it was almost like that kickstarted this journey of, okay, I'm going to be strong, I'm going to be athletic. This is my force field. But there's this also meditative side to martial arts that maybe even kind of kickstarted you on the path that you were meant to be on. So I just kind of wanted to mention that, because you told the story of kind of getting bullied and picked on in your life.
It's actually interesting. One of my best friends is another guy from sports. Once I got into Taekwondo and I got good at it, and I competed, and I traveled around the world for a number of years competing and fighting, and that was a wonderful life. But this great friend of mine, he experienced bullying as well, and that was something that he was always fascinated by. And every competition we went to, didn't matter which country it was in, you'd get talking to other fighters, and he'd always ask them, so what made you take it up? What made you get into it? And more than half of the people said bullying, and it was always really strange, because you had these guys who were incredible fighters, and you wouldn't. Back then Taekwondo is a little bit different now, but back then it was full contact and a lot of knockouts, and it was a hard sport. And you certainly wouldn't have looked to pick on any of these guys, but there were all these individuals who had gone and built that force field and looked to try and build that strength, and that's one way to do it. But then exactly as we just said, you still kind of need to actually look at the other side of it, and you need to be able to express that vulnerability and be strong enough to do so. So the force field's great, but you still need to be able to get that energy to move. You can there's plenty of big, strong, tough men that have, and women that have come unstuck mentally and emotionally because they've shut off from those processes. So yeah, it's definitely a side that you can't ignore. Where you need to be able to open up to it and to be able to express it.
Yeah, well, there's so much more that I feel like we can talk about. I feel like it just, even on the bullying side, I feel like all three of us here on this call have experienced it, and it's definitely set me on a path in my life as well, with athletics, and also just in, wanting to, like, at one point in my life, I was like, oh, I want to be a lawyer. I realized I used to say as a kid, I want to be a lawyer, right? Thinking back to that now, the reason why I wanted to be a lawyer was because I wanted to defend other people from bullies. So that was my whole spiel, or at one point I was like, I want to be a nurse, and it was because I really wanted to take care of people, right? This is when I was figuring myself out, but there's just so much more, even that I feel like we can have a whole 3 hours on end conversation about just the gut, the microbiome, and how the gut influences our brain, and how that influences our decisions, and how that influences our emotions. Just how you briefly talked about heart math, how really the answers don't come from your brain, your logical brain. The truth comes from your heart. Like, one of the things that I love to tell people is your heart has all the answers, not your mind. It's your heart. But I'm really curious, are there any books that you recommend or products that you just can't live without, that you can share with our audience that are interested in just getting into this area or diving deeper into this area?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I read a lot of medical journals, and I read a lot of things that are kind of packed with neurophysiology and whatnot, but neuroanatomy. But I think some of the things that are just that are far more digestible, some of the authors that are far more digestible, I think Dr. Joe Dispenza is fantastic, and I love his gift of being able to break down complex topics, explain it in everyday language, and it's inspiring to listen to, because it just resonates on a level that people understand. And so he's got a couple of books, Becoming Supernatural and Evolve Your Brain. I think both of those books are absolutely fantastic. There's another couple of books. Dawson Church, Mind to Matter, I think is a great book. Just when you're starting to try and understand the interconnectedness of things. Candace Pert's beautiful book on the molecules of emotion is also a great book. And all those ones, none of those books are heavy reading. They're really, really great books to get into, and I guess so you can start to understand more of, as we said, the levels of your being. More you start to understand perhaps a little bit more of the interconnectedness of things, and how your emotions are kind of dictating your behaviour and dictating running your life essentially. And so the gut-brain axis and the microbiome absolutely play a big role in that. Our emotions and our emotional reactivity to things plays a huge role in that. And the way that our hormones, and so the pituitary gland, and the way that it that it basically regulates these neurochemical substrates out into the body to get the responses that it wants. And I think, and Joe Dispenza, I think it was the one who sort of he coined the analogy of the pituitary gland being like a bartender, but it's the only bar in town. So it's got all its regular customers, and so what it does, it's incredibly intelligent, and it knows, it listens to all these, takes its cues from the hypothalamus, and it gets all of these signals, and it can mix up the chemical of cocktails that it needs for each specific emotion, for each specific reaction, for each specific event that you experience in life. But what that bartender does over time is it gets to know the regulars, and then it starts to say, hey, I know what you like. So instead of listening to the signals, it just knows the signals, because again, we need to come back to the point that the brain is a small organ, but it places huge energy demands on the body. And so from a survival standpoint, and the body's number one priority is always to survive, the brain knows that its survival chances are going to be increased dramatically if it can just switch off and go onto autopilot, and if it can just run automated programs. It knows that its chances of survival, its chances of surviving until its next meal go up, because that increases the amount of time that it can last before it needs to refuel again. So the brain demands so much energy that it is constantly looking to try and switch off and run these habituated automated programs so that it can conserve energy, because that costs way less energy than thinking about things and calculating things. And certainly for something like the pituitary gland, it costs a lot less energy just to give the regulars the order that, give them their cocktail of chemicals and that regular order every single time and make it the same order. It costs a lot less energy to figure that out and just run that automated program. rather than actually compute and think about it and listen to the signals and listen to your thoughts and give you the mix of chemicals that you actually need. So basically what he said was, that literally that bartender is running the show, because it's sending out all of the all of the hormones in a specific mix to get you to behave in certain ways, and then you just become a slave to that. You become a slave to those behaviors, and that sort of goes back to what we were talking about with meditation. You sit down and try and be quiet, and your body starts sending you these signals to get you to move, to get you to do something that it wants to do. And so I guess that's all part of the big, all part of that bigger picture of health and understanding the body. If we understand that, our emotions have a huge effect on us, we understand that, that the gut, the microbiome, literally is regulating and is more in control of our mood and our emotions than perhaps the brain is. Understanding that the heart is sending us all of these signals. There's a huge picture to the body, and there's a huge picture to, I guess, to the truth of it all. And it's looking at the whole. If we can look at the whole and we're open to all of these different things and putting all of that information together, we'll get the best possible result in ourselves, and we'll get the best possible result for healing. But it's being open, to looking at all these things.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Scott, and just thank you for sharing all of your wisdom with us and spending time with us today. Is there anything else that you would want to add for the listeners? Any kind of tips or last minute wisdom for anyone out there that may be listening to this episode?
I would just say that we're all here to heal. Literally everybody, as I said, everybody's carrying wounds. You can call it baggage, you can call it wounds, you can call it trauma, you can call it whatever you like, but we're all carrying it. And so, basically the world needs it. I mean, you look at the state of the world, and you look at the state of humanity, at the moment, and there's so much turbulence, and there's so much polarity, and people aren't talking and discussing things. As soon as on social media, if someone expresses an opinion and people disagree with it, well, then it's like I must hate you because I disagree with you and you disagree with me, so that's it. We can't be friends. And there's so much polarity, and we're not designed to be like that. That's not kind of the way that we're set up to be. And so healing those wounds, healing traumas, healing ourselves, you heal the earth, you heal humanity, you heal those around you. So as like we said, there's you can call it, there's a base particle. I think they call it the God particle. And it's something that science is chasing, trying to find the God particle, something that is so small. And it's described kind of in esoteric terms that if there is that God particle, if there's a base substance to everything, if you break everything right down, that there's one, call it a molecule, call it a particle. There's one substance that just makes up everything. So it makes up the air between us. It makes up everything that's in the physical body. It makes up everything that is, everything in the environment is made up of that same substance. If that's the case, then that's basically what people mean when they say there's no separation. There is literally no separation between me, between you two on the other side of the world. Like we are literally all connected, and we are all, all part of a whole. And it's so when we see that separation, then that's what drives division, and that's what drives wounds and anger and that polarity that we talk about. So when you start to explore your own healing journey, you're going to heal yourself, and you'll heal others around you. And as such, then you begin to heal you heal the world, you heal humanity. And so that's kind of, for me, that's, I guess, my mission. That's what I'm doing every day. That's what I'm really, really passionate about, doing these retreats. And I guess I would say on that, the people at the retreat said that anybody, they had an early bird special, which is now elapsed. That anybody who is looking to heal, for me, that being in that healthy environment where you've been given organic food, you're in touch with nature, you're in tune with the rhythm of the day and of the environment around you, and you've got healing and positive energy all around you, and you've got supportive practitioners from a number of different modalities that can kind of open up and unpack whatever the wounds are that need to be healed while you're there. That's about as good as you could possibly do. So for anybody who's looking to sort of take things to another level in terms of their healing, that company, Integrated Vitality Retreats, said they would extend the early bird price to any of the listeners on this show. So that if that's something that anybody's looking for, then that's something I would highly recommend.
Absolutely. And if you can send me a link to that, I will go ahead and link that in the show notes so that anyone listening can easily click a link and get where they need to go to access the information about that retreat.
Okay, and that's available on my bio.
Oh, nice.
On Instagram or on Facebook as well. So.
And on Instagram, you are the.brain.guy, right? Just so people know where to find you on Instagram as well.
That's me, the brain guy. Correct.
Yeah, brain guy.
I'm already following you.
It's interesting. I became the brain guy because I got into this whole thing looking at the brain and the nervous system. And that's, that's kind of where you start in applied movement neurology. And that is hugely impactful because they're the systems that govern the physical body. But then, I guess now I definitely work with the brain and the nervous system, and they are hugely impactful, but there's just more. There's just more to it. Yeah. So again, when we're looking for truth, we have to be open to it. There's always more.
Yeah. One of the things that I love that my spiritual teachers, my pranic healing mentor told us during our training was that everything happens in the spiritual world before it happens in the physical world.
Absolutely. And this is I've put this out there on social media before that, if energy is, if matter is an epiphenomenon of energy, which basically just means matter comes from, everything is energy and matter comes from that, then why are we looking at disease as a physical thing and treating it on a physical level, which disease appears in the human energy field first. It literally the imprint of disease is there, and you can see it, you can read it. It's been tested. There have been studies that have been done on it. It's not something that our current science paradigm wants to look at, because the scientific paradigm is deeply rooted in 3D physical matter, so Newtonian physics. And so medical science as such, only looks at physicality. But by the time that disease has gotten itself has manifested in the physical body, that energy's already been there for quite some time. So, I see things with people in healing that look like, at some point it could potentially develop into disease. And I don't know if it would, or if it would, or if it wouldn't, but I look and I see things and think, well, we clear that, and hopefully that's all gone long before it manifests into anything more sinister. But that is an amazing point to be aware of. Like, everything happens in energy first. Absolutely. It's incredibly true. And just because you can't see it, or because science doesn't necessarily want to look at it, and on that note, I would add a book to that. There's a book called Real Magic by Dean Radin, PhD, and it's a fantastic book if anybody's sort of looking to just understand the limitations of our current scientific paradigm. And so basically he's looking at paranormal phenomena, and so things that we would call psychic or paranormal phenomena, and how it has been scientifically evidenced. And there are, I think he's got 17 different studies that achieve the 6 Sigma standard, which is basically the highest standard in science, which basically means a lot of these studies need to be so strictly and rigidly designed that they can't be faulted, because they're exploring some pretty controversial topics. So people are going to try and poke holes in them. So the wonderful benefit to that is that they design these studies so robustly that the results really aren't down to a chance. So 6 Sigma standard basically means that it's kind of one in a billion chance that the results are down to 1 in a billion probability that the results are down to chance. So it's not chance that these things are happening, but it doesn't get published in scientific journals because it just doesn't fit that paradigm. So when you look at that, it's really, really easy to then make the link and jump across to see what's happening in the body that, say, medical science doesn't particularly want to look at because it just doesn't fit that model. But it doesn't mean that it's not happening. So yeah, Real Magic by Dean Radin, that's a fantastic book to get into and explore.
Amazing. I will link all of the books that you mentioned in the show notes, so everyone can easily find those on a link on our website. So head there if you're interested in seeking out any of those books. And Scott, thank you so much. Energy is like, when you talk about it, it kind of reminds me of like mycelium of the world. It's hitched to everything in the universe, and And it really does affect everything that happens, not only from a Homo sapien level, but also within nature. So you're in Australia. I do want to mention to everyone, there's lots of fires going on over there, and anything that anyone can do to help with that. We can link something in the show notes for you guys to know where, how to help and where to go for that information. And I kind of wanted to conclude with, just going back to nature, taking it back to this theme of nature. And really, when you're going out into nature, you're really going inward. So again, thank you so much for coming on the show and just being vulnerable with us today. Really appreciate it.
No. Actually, it's been really, really nice to chat and really, really nice to share a bit of that stuff. It's always not. I love what I get to do, and I love getting to talk about the brain, the body, the nervous system, and everything. But getting to talk about just being a whole person and how you can, heal yourself and get to be a whole person. That's just really beautiful. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and I'm really grateful that you guys have had me on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. We also want to give a shout out to Ian and Mark, the founders of La Repubblica Coffee. Not only have they been so amazing to work with, but they're authentic, and I really see big things happening for the company just because of their transparency, their integrity with ingredients, and giving a great product.
Yeah, and I love the fact that it really is this wonderful elixir of these adaptogenic herbs that Jess mentioned. If you guys are interested, we do have a discount code. It is
vulnerable, all caps 15. So vulnerable 15. Head over to larepublicasuperfoods.com and type in vulnerable 15 when you check out. You will receive a 15% discount on all of La Repubblica's mushroom coffee. I love their coffee. It's tasty, but it's also quality. Thank you for listening to the Bold and Vulnerable podcast. For more information on today's speaker, please visit us at boldandvulnerablepodcast.com.
And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Let's keep spreading the love by being bold and vulnerable. Thank you. We love you.